All right. Eclectic theater is categorized from about 1950 to the year 2000, and some context of what's going on. So it starts in about the 1950s, so it's just about the end of World War II, or a few years after the end of World War II, excuse me. And so the effects of the war influence change in art all across the board, and specifically theater. Um, It was the end of modernism. Social changes occurred, such as the returning soldiers had new ideas and expectations about how they should live their life, comforts of life. With the GI Bill, a lot of people entered college for the first time. So you're going to see a lot of social changes influence theater. Technology changes as new technology became available, such as television sets, radios, computers, and the internet. And then worldview changes. Postmodernism came into effect here, and the concepts included the doubt of concepts of objectivity and truth, doubt of concept of absolute meaning, belief in bottom-up participation rather than top-down dictation, belief in differences and shades of meaning rather than black and white opposites, suspicion of ideas of progress, objectivity, reason, certainty, and personal identity, and the belief in truth, shaped by cultural bias, myth, metaphor, and political content. And then eclecticism comes into play here, which is a theatrical change, and it was taking new styles and practices from all sorts of places and bringing them into the theater. New types of theater and theater education became relevant within with new theater avenues. Types of theaters such as dinner theaters, commercial theaters, and then off Broadway theaters, and then educational theaters. Theater departments in schools and colleges were opened, and you could get a degree in some form of theater. And then in the 1950s, society moved towards pop culture. So it moved towards pop culture and away from theater. So in this picture here, you see there's Marilyn Monroe, there's Elvis Presley, there's Hollywood, the Hollywood sign in the background, there's football, big band music, Mickey Mouse, cars, baseball, John Wayne's in the back, and then President Eisenhower. So things in new forms of entertainment and that sort of thing influenced society and took away from theater. Avant-garde theater. So one of the key things about avant-garde is absurdism, and it's referring to, or it's a term that critics use to review a show, and it's not what you'd think it would mean. It doesn't mean ridiculous, but it meant without meaning. So the artists who wrote shows that were considered absurd were they abandoned story and dramatic unity, and the plays were often constructed as a circle, so events circle back. And then street theater and guerrilla theater became popular in the 1950s and the 1960s with the arrival of the Vietnam War. Street theater was you would go to the audience and perform. You would go out into the street, you'd go to your people and perform the show. And then guerrilla theater was sort of like a hit and run theater where you would go to a public place, perform, and then leave. And a lot of it was about political performances against the war and against social change, and so on. And then in the 1960s, black theater became very popular. it grew out of radical turmoil from the 1950s. A lot of times before the 1950s, 1960s, if a show had an African American character, it usually was played by a white person who had blackfaced. There were African American actors, but very, very few. And in the 1960s, that's when black theater became increasingly popular. One of the shows that is most famous today still and is very popular from that time period is in 1959, Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun. It was produced on Broadway, and that was a very popular and very intense show. That show, along with other shows, showed the revel of white power and the abuse of white power. And then in the 1970s, women's theater became very increasingly popular. It was established and a structured theater in the 1970s, but it was growing through the 1950s and 1960s. And it was female groups who would band together to promote goals of feminism. There were some men involved in these groups, but it was predominantly female. And then homosexual theater became popular. In 1976, the Glines Theater opened in New York City, and it was dedicated to producing plays about and by homosexual people. And the shows really sympathized with homosexual lives, their hardships, their struggles, and that sort of thing. And then living theater came about in the 1947, and it was founded by Julian Beck and Judith Molina, and it started as an art theater in New York. And the shows that were put on in this living theater were realistic issues, issues such as drugs, military imprisonment, that sort of thing. And it had 4 cells or 4 factions, or if you will, that were the bases and of living theater, and they were politics, the environment, the culture, and the spirit. And living theater really promoted the participation of the audience members. So here we have a couple pictures. Here's a group of African American women, and here we have a female or women's group. There are some men, as you can see here, but as you can see, there's a lot of women in here as well. And then here we have a depiction of a homosexual show. So open theater became increasingly popular. Closed theater means like a Broadway show. So open theater was promoted the unity of the worker, the performance, the actors, the directors, all that sort of thing. It focused on unity rather than individuality of the actors, and it was promoting working together. As I said, everybody was part of the ensemble: the actors, directors, designers, makeup artists, everyone. And it really focused on the actors within the performances, rather than not, I guess. Sorry. And then the plays, new techniques and new ideas came about. Ideas such as unity through exploring central ideas and themes, the free and disconnected treatment of time and place, transformations, character transformations from costumes to complete different characters. All that was a new concept that was seen on stage. And then the actors were encouraged to become the set and the sound, to be part of the stage rather than be on the stage. And then the avant-garde influence, it allowed a greater freedom of language, so slang, cuss words, that sort of thing. And taboo subjects were treated freely. They were included more in the shows. And then a lot of awards were awarded to plays of African American, female, and Hispanic authors. And then plays were produced that were by homosexual authors. And it really encouraged the social change within theater. Professional theaters. Professional theaters had large budgets, extremely large budgets, and as an actor, as a director, people within the theater could now make a decent living off being in the theater. And professional theaters opened up in other cities besides New York, such as Chicago and Los Angeles. For commercial theaters, the production costs rose, and so it was harder to keep them going. And shows, they did a lot of revival shows, and comedy shows were a staple within commercial theaters because it was a way to ensure money, because they knew if they put on a comedy show that people would come. And serious drama became popular at this point, such as plays such as The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Those shows became increasingly popular as well. Nonprofit theaters also became important within the theaters. Shows come in and they have their budget, and then they don't make profit off of their shows. The money that they do get is put back into the show. And then the theaters began to perform shows from other countries. They imported other shows, shows from France, London, Germany, because they needed a new shows to bring in new audience members and money. The decline in cultural displacement of theater. So theater ended up having to compete with other forms of entertainment, such as the radio, the television, live concerts, that sort of thing. Theater declined in success. However, educational, nonprofit, and community theaters remained healthy. A lot of theaters struggled with money, like I said, and then the technology, the new technology and new forms of technology led to people's a change in what they wanted and what they desired for entertainment, what they wanted to see, that sort of thing. And theater was a huge part of the oral culture, but as electronics came into society, society was dominated by electronic items rather than the theater, and that's why its popularity decreased in this time period. excited. Thank you.